Hello everyone, welcome back to Future Fiber. This is your host Jenny, and today marks the start of a new series called I Like Your Sweater. This is a place for me to invite other knitters who have an interest in fashion and style and hear a little bit about their experience in the knitting community and also how that affects their lives. The first guest for the series is Amanda, better known as Knits by Mandy. So I guess to kind of kick it off, would you mind just introducing yourself a little bit quickly to the audience at home? I know I feel like our audience, the Venn diagram of our audience is probably a circle, but
I'm there's actually no overlap or there's no two circles. It's just the same thing. But sure. My name's Amanda. I go by Knits by Mandy online. And I'm a knitter. Sometimes I do crochet and other fiber arts. And I knew how to knit when I was very young, but I started getting back into knitting and knitting garments during the pandemic, like a lot of folks. And I also started sharing, I think on my YouTube channel about a year and a half ago, and I think almost 2 years for my Instagram. And it's just been a really fun way to connect with other knitters because I didn't have any friends in real life that wanted to talk about knitting or, knew about knitting. So I've been really enjoying the online knitting community.
Yeah. I love that. And I feel like a lot of that probably resonates with a lot of more newer knitters slash knitting podcasters. I feel like our experience, or at least my experience, is very similar to yours. So I love that. And I think that's a really great starting point, actually, because I guess the first question I wanted to ask you was how you got into knitting, because knitting again, right? Because I think a lot of my kind of inspiration for starting to knit again was just wanting to recreate a lot of the stuff that I saw in regular fashion, because I think that kind of plays into style and things a lot. So I'm curious if that was the case for you or if it was another motivation.
That wasn't the case for me. I knit my boyfriend a scarf. That was what got me back into it. My mom suggested for the first Christmas gift I give my boyfriend is to knit him a scarf, and I thought that was weird. Then I was like, actually, that's really cute. So this was December 2020. And after kind of going through, remembering what the process is and how meditative it is, that's what got me back into it. And then I knit my first sweater, I think just to see if I could. And I think the first few garments I made, I really wasn't thinking about, is this my style? Is this something I'll wear? I recently did a closet clean out. I don't really wear, I don't know a lot of people that wear the first couple sweaters I made, but I made a chunky turtleneck sweater that's so, thinking of it now, it's warm here. It was made to sweat. But yeah, I think it was something to do, right? That's what kind of got me back into it. And then I think style and all those other things kind of came later, for me at least.
Yeah, okay. That's really interesting, because I think I just had always assumed that people that got into knitting or just started knitting around our age or younger even would get in because they wanted the end product. But I guess, it's so interesting hearing that you started kind of as a process knitter, actually, more than a product knitter.
I guess so. I never really considered myself a process knitter, but I think looking back, I was really can I do this? Can I make a sweater? And then I did it and I was oh, this is amazing. This is awesome. I want to keep doing this. But yeah, now I think I'm definitely more of a project knitter where I'm very motivated by the thing that I want to make and finish and ultimately wear.
Right. So I guess for the projects that you are now inspired by, where do you get those inspirations? I feel I get my inspirations from Pinterest and Instagram. I merged those together. And just photo form. But do you find yourself scrolling and shopping a lot still and getting inspiration there, or is it more organic through social media?
I would say it's mostly through social media, mostly Instagram and seeing what other knitters are making. I feel that's my biggest influence is watching other knitting podcasters and being oh, that's a really good idea. I think you made a black cami, and I was like, I need a black cami. So it's a lot of that. But I also do love like going into stores now and playing the I could make that game. So a
Yes.
little bit from commercial stores. It's kind of interesting how like commercial like fashion informs maybe knit design and like vice versa. I remember like after making the Ingrid sweater, seeing a lot of like textural like crosshatch designs and like
Mhm.
which came first. Yeah, I think strangely it's made me more cognizant of like what's trending and like what's popular.
Yeah, oh my God. That's actually a really great point because I've also noticed that too. I mean, I don't really shop a lot now because I am on kind of a self-imposed no buy, but
Right.
I do kind of like still go to stores. Like I live in New York, so I obviously see like window fronts
Right.
and you see all these kind of fast fashion, commercially made stuff that there really are influences, and I'm not sure. Yeah, like I'm not sure if it's what the chicken or the egg problem. I would
Right.
imagine it's a lot of it is the knitwear designers, like when Lyrica Matoshi, her chunky knits really went viral, and Hope McCauley. You were seeing that a lot in like stores, like yeah. So yeah, that's an interesting point for sure.
Yeah, the chunky knits that was like a huge, I think, maybe an impetus by knit designers in that case.
Yeah. And kind of interesting because it seems like that's where we started as well. Like it was like the perfect blend of pandemic and chunky knitting for beginners and just it being trendy, which is why I feel like I kind of started on that, which is pretty interesting.
Yeah, it is a I feel like there's a lot of discourse about chunky knits, like, oh, it's for beginners, but like people don't wear them or whatever. But it is just a really good starting point when you think about it, that it's like it's easy, it'll keep your
Mhm.
attention. And I also think it helps you like understand stitches and like read your stitches too, because it's so
Yeah,
big.
yeah, yeah.
That's a really good point. I don't know if you've ever tried to teach somebody how to knit, but I feel like that's like the first thing that they struggle with is understanding how to read stitches, and the chunky knits definitely help with that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Amazing. Okay, well, I guess we kind of went on that little tangent there, but the next question I had for you was just like, I guess we started. So what keeps you going with knitting?
That's a great question. And like I think part of me is like, when will I ever stop? Like I think the routine of it keeps me going. And like feeding that creative part of me also keeps me going. Like I love being able to do something with my hands. I find now when I don't have a project to work on, I'm like fiending for something.
Mm-hmm.
But I also, one of I think the hardest transitions for me from like going to college to being a young adult was that like I had no creative outlets as an adult, and like the 9 to 5 job structure is made that so like there's really no like built-in time for you to be creative and like foster the things you want to foster. So like, you have to do that yourself. And I found that knitting is like so well, it has filled that void I felt like that I was maybe missing and looking for in my early 20s.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. Well, you don't have to answer this because I feel like you don't really talk about your job, but do you work in a creative field?
No, I can talk about it. I work at a uh I work at a tech company that does virtual events and online courses. So
Okay.
I'm a program manager. So like no. It's very like it's not creative. There are creative folks that I work with, but I'm not in the creative field.
Yeah, I get you on that. I feel like I have the title designer in my job, but I don't really do a lot of like the creative outlet stuff that I feel like I get to do with knitting. So it's like, it
Yeah.
definitely feels like it unlocks a different part of your brain when you're knitting, which is cool. Even if I'm not, okay, so I had a shower thought yesterday and I was thinking about like my position in the knitting sphere, right? Because I definitely think there are different types of creators, but like the people who are actively creating the patterns and excuse me, knitwear designs, I would categorize them as like creators, and in a way we're creators as well, but I think my bigger position as a knitter is a consumer. And I feel like, I don't know where I was going with that, but I was just like thinking about like the different positions in the knitting sphere. And I guess I'm curious on your thought, if you would also consider yourself more of a consumer in the knitting sphere or more of a creator?
I would definitely consider myself more of a consumer. Like, there's something like I output other than like the content that I make, which is about other people's designs and yarns, you know? So I definitely feel like, yeah, I create content about it, but really like when it comes to the knitting things like designs, yarn, whatever, I'm a consumer for sure.
Yeah. But, I mean, I like that there's that variety in the community, I guess, since...
Me too.
Yeah, it's kind of, I guess, why people watch us, right? Like, it's that relatable feeling of, watching somebody struggle through a pattern, and you don't even have to leave the house.
Exactly. I think, I have this like maybe incorrect idea of like back in the day, like women had knitting circles and like all this knowledge was passed orally and like
yes.
around the fire at night. I don't know, like it's might not be historically accurate, but like to me, when I'm thinking about like watching people vlog their projects or just like knitting podcasts, I'm like, this is like another way to like, this is going to sound so corny and maybe not correct, but it's like another way to like extend the oral tradition of knitting.
Mm-hmm.
Someone could correct me in the comments.
No, but I feel like that's so like an apt comparison, or at least to me, because I learned most of my advanced knitting techniques, as well as some beginner ones, through YouTube. And it's like, I didn't have anybody who would really teach me that orally, like I didn't have a grandma who knit. So it's like, definitely, I feel like that's an apt comparison for sure.
Yeah.
Okay, maybe this is a bad question, but how do you think about the knitting community? Like, how would you define it, right? Because I think in this day and age, like you said, it feels a little bit different than, like a small circle of friends that you would have that meets every week for a knit night. I guess the definition is a little bit wider now, and I'm curious on hearing your thoughts.
Yeah, it is an interesting question, because I think I might not be the best person to answer this like anthropologically, but there's like almost two aspects of like the online knitting community. There's of course like consumers and people maybe like us that just like knit things, we talk about them, but there's also people there's like a marketplace, right? Where people are selling their patterns, they're selling their yarns, but it's, I would say like symbiotic, right? Like I feel like they feed into each other really well, and I like that we can support small businesses in that way, but there is also like that aspect of people are buying and selling goods from each other, right? Like, I don't think that can be ignored when thinking about like the online aspect of it, right? Like thinking of like big yarn dyer, like they're when they drop a sale, like everyone's on it. But I think it's also very supportive in that way, that I think that's great.
Yeah.
I don't know if that answered your question.
No, definitely it did. And that's a really great point that you made about like that marketplace kind of. And I feel like with knitting designers as well as yarn dyers and stuff, in a way, they're kind of marketing their personal style with their designs as well. Like, for example, petite knit, like realistically, like
that's exactly who I thought of, right?
Right? Like there are definitely that division in, or maybe I wouldn't call it a division, but there are different categories of knitwear designers as well, where some people definitely do it more for the craft. And like, I feel like why am I blanking on Stephen West? I feel like a lot of his shawl designs are really creative in a way that maybe like aren't with like a style, like a wearable style in mind, but they feel really experimental. But Petite Knit, like she's definitely selling. She feels to me more like a retail store where they're selling this like vision of an outfit that you could complete by making the knitting.
Right. Like she has a brand and it comes, she markets it very well, obviously. But yeah, it's like there is that difference, I think. But there's that space also, I think, for people to, if they want to brand themselves like Petite Knit and brand themselves like a store, or if they want to make like really cool subversive art, like there's space for both of those things. And I think that's really cool and special too.
It's definitely like that range of craft and art to like function and fashion, which I think is pretty interesting.
It's like a huge spectrum of all those things.
I love that for us. So many choices. So interesting. Knitting is so interesting.
It is. It's interesting, I think, not to cut you off, but like something that can be so literally functional and that I can pick this top to wear every day, but also it's art. Like I think, like how many other art forms are like that? I mean, I guess that's fashion, right? I'm just describing what fashion is.
No, but it's true. And it's like different because I feel like knitting is accessible, right? Like fashion, the art part of fashion, I feel like is very inaccessible depending on, I mean, there's also talks about like economic like availability in knitting as well, but it's a lot more approachable than compared to like, I don't know, high fashion. Like high fashion being presented as an art form, you can't like put that on your body, but you can go out and create something that might be considered more avant-garde, but you can still create that for yourself and put it on your body. So I feel like it's a little bit different.
It is different. And I think the entry point I feel is a little more accessible than maybe learning to sew or something like that. But sewists might disagree with me there.
Well, luckily this is a knitting channel and we're more focused on knitting. So
exactly.
Oh yeah, I guess this is a tangent, but since we brought up sewing, do you ever sew your own garments or do you have an interest in it?
I've never, but I do have an interest. I think seeing other creators like Making Cassie comes to mind. Like she knits and she sews. Like I just want like a whole handmade wardrobe. I want that so badly. I'm just so into knitting right now that I think sewing will be like a different chapter in my life.
Yeah.
If that makes sense. You sew, right? Or do you do a little sewing?
I do a little dibble dabble in sewing, yes.
Yeah.
But it's so much harder. I agree with you on that fact because maybe it's just my brain, but knitting feels a lot more portable. You could carry it around, like you could pick up from like anywhere. But sewing, unless you're hand sewing, which I don't like hand sewing because like that feels like the cost of work versus output is not worth it.
Yeah. No.
It's not fun like knitting. So yeah, that's why I feel like sewing I have to be in the mood. I have to be in the mental state where I want to sit down for 8 hours straight.
It seems in a way like more like focused, and that's talking about like using other parts of your brain. Even though I have a basic understanding of how knit garments are constructed, like thinking of pattern pieces coming together to make garments sewing wise, like I know like that would mess up my mind. Like I know I would be sitting there being like, okay, I have to have this like inside out and put the wrong, like that would break my brain. Like I don't have good like spatial reasoning or awareness that way.
Yeah, and oh my God, it's like definitely something that you learn or pick up, I think.
Yeah.
But yeah, if you're not used to doing it, it's not something that it for sure didn't come naturally to me. I studied like 3D design in school, so like the first time I had to create something into like 2D into 3D, I was like, like my brain broken. I don't know. You gotta rewire your brain.
Yeah, and I guess we had to do that when we learned how to knit too. I feel like I don't want to be like so disconnected from like remembering how like a raglan was made. I was like, what? Like
Oh yeah.
I'm like mind blown, but to me, I'm like, oh, this just seems like so much more natural. But it's like, okay, you've been doing it for almost 2 years.
Mm,
Obviously, it seems
mhm.
easier. So
Yeah. Oh my
it all
God.
comes like with a learning curve.
I guess kind of along that, I guess we could kind of transition into talking about a little bit more about personal style. Would you mind like
Sure.
outside of knitting, just in general, like would you be able to describe your personal style to us?
Sure. I was thinking about this because I know we were going to talk about it. I don't know if I have like a solid answer, but if I had to describe it, I prioritize comfort.
Mm.
And this summer, I am feeling very like coastal grandmother. Like I do
Oh,
want to look like Chessie from The Parent Trap. I think that's my like that's what I hold true. So I would say like comfortable. I'm usually like a more casual, like breezy dresser, I feel. But I also kind of like playing with some more feminine elements as well.
That's perfectly described, and I feel like I resonate with that a lot, which is maybe why our Venn diagram is a circle.
Yeah.
I love that because I feel like I'm exactly the same with like my style, but I guess with that, do you feel like this is something that you've had kind of solidified before you started knitting, or has it transitioned in a way since you started knitting?
I think it's definitely changed a little with knitting. It's made me think like so much more about, do I like this? Would I
mm.
wear this, you know, this season? Would I wear it in 2 years and things like that? And I think it's also maybe opened my mind to things that I didn't know I would like. Like, I know we can't see you, but you're wearing the Ingrid sweater right now. And when I first saw that, I was like, oh, that's like fine. Like, I don't know if that's for me. But then, of course, I stared at it for a long time and then I made it. And it's like my favorite thing. Like, I
Yes.
love it so much. Now I feel like I veered off from the question. But also, oh, the other thing that I think has like influenced my style so much is the pandemic though, because
Oh.
like I went from wearing so much like Ann Taylor Loft and like J. Crew
Mm.
Factory because I
Hmm.
was working. And it was things that I think I would buy things being like, I could wear this to work instead of like,
Mm.
do I like this? And now I don't have like any of those things in my wardrobe because I have the luxury and privilege of working from home. But I think like the pandemic made us all maybe like prioritize comfort a lot more in our clothing and like functionality. So I think that's also like the convergence of me knitting and the pandemic happening at the same time. I think those are two big influences on how I think my style's probably evolved in the past few years.
Yeah. Oh my God, that's a really great point about the pandemic. I definitely agree. And I feel like the whole sphere of fashion has kind of transitioned away from, well, okay, maybe I am just talking out of my ass here. But I feel like for a while, like there was this shift towards very comfortable clothing, which I feel like I definitely see that in myself as well. Um, I definitely used to wear. Well, I worked in a very like, well, I worked at startups, so I wasn't really thinking about if it was work appropriate or not necessarily, but I still was wearing a lot more like fitted waistbands, and yeah, I don't have room for that anymore.
In my closet.
Absolutely not. I remember like trying on clothes. This was like in 2021 that I used to wear to work. And I'm just like, I could like stay in this skirt like all day. Like that's insane to me. Like after, being able to have business on top, sweatpants on the
Yeah.
bottom for 2 years. But and I think and I wonder if for people that have gone back into the office, if their like go-to kind of work clothes have changed too.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that'll be potentially a set of questions to ask for the whoever gets to be my next victim in this series. Maybe I'll get somebody who goes into office.
If you get a real person who leaves their home.
Not a home office gremlin like I.
I'm such a gremlin when I'm working from home. I kind of love it, honestly. I can't complain.
Me too. I'm like, I have 4 drinks at once, like a drink for fun, a drink for sustenance and caffeine, and a drink for hydration, and then a drink from yesterday. And I can't do that at work. All right. Oh, I don't even know where we started with this conversation. What were we
Oh,
talking
you
about?
asked me to describe my style.
We've come so far. I love that.
We've come so far.
And yes, and we were talking about how your knitting might have changed that a little bit. But oh yeah, this is I wanted to make a point about like what you said, which was around like thinking about the longevity, I guess, of an item in your wardrobe, which is not really something that I considered to that point before, right? Like I definitely have pieces that I've worn like for, years and years and years, but that was not really, how do I say? That wasn't really an active choice. Like it just happened naturally. Yeah, but I feel like with anything I create from scratch, I have to think a little bit more long term. Well, create from scratch with yarn, I have to think a little bit more long term about if I'm going to be wearing this in like 5 years, because hopefully I'll have this in 5 years.
Right. It creates like a whole different relationship from like person to piece of clothing in my head because it's so easy to like pick up a sweater or like buy a $5 tank top from Target. And it's like, okay, I have no allegiance to this piece of clothing, but if I make it, I'm like, I at least to me, I'm like, I want to be able to have this. And at least if I'm not gonna like have it for many years, at least get so much wear out of it, you know?
Yeah, definitely. And I feel like it changes how I see, I mean, you kind of touched on this too, but I feel like it changes how I purchase and
Oh yeah.
see sweaters that are commercially made. Like now I know like what it actually takes to, a machine is doing it, but like we know like the fiber types and what they wear like, what they feel like on the body. So it makes me a little bit more hesitant to buy certain types of sweaters commercially, because I know like, oh yeah, this is gonna like fall apart in a couple of years or whatever.
Yeah. I feel like it's made me so like polyester adverse. Like thinking of all like the work clothes I used to wear, like oh like it gets so hot here in the summer. Like thinking of like polyester on my skin makes me like curl up. And like thinking of all like the acrylic or like polyester like sweaters, like that's what like the majority of fast fashion is. Not that I hate on acrylic. For me, it's just not my bag, you know?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It definitely is like,
At least to wear.
yeah, that's a good point too, because like it can work very well depending on application and like where you live and stuff, but definitely not very fun in the summer or transitional periods.
One of my first crochet projects was like an acrylic crochet top, which obviously I never wore because that's insane. It's like worse than weight yard.
I mean, we all make those mistakes, you know?
The lessons we learn along the way, right?
It really is. And it's so funny because I'm watching a friend take up knitting and crocheting right now, and she's going through the same mistakes. Even though like she asked me for advice and I give her advice. So it's like really like a rite of passage. You have to figure that out for yourself.
I think when you first start knitting, you're like, I'm not going to drop $120 like on 100% wool for a sweater. Like that sounds
Mm.
like so expensive, and it is expensive. So it like makes complete sense why we go for those more affordable fibers first, because you're like, I don't know if I'll do this. I don't know if I'll like this. Like it's a good entry point. It makes sense. And I mean, some people like using it in for sweaters, garments, whatever. And yeah.
Yeah. I definitely feel like you have to build your way up to spending like a sweater, spending like $150 on a sweater's quantity of yarn. You get slowly indoctrinated through knitting YouTube, and you're like, okay, yes, now I am ready to drop some monies.
Like this is normal.
Yeah, and it's like, I think about, and I'm not saying this is a good or bad thing, but I just feel like it's more of a fair assessment of the raw material cost of something that is going to last you for not a lifetime maybe, but maybe close to a lifetime, for a long time at least. And yeah, it definitely reframed how I think about and how much money I spend on regular clothes as well. Like now I definitely buy less. Even aside from the no buy, I definitely buy less, and definitely look at like quality more than I used to, which is interesting.
Yeah, I feel the same way in that I like I and I in this like I want to just acknowledge like this comes from I think like a certain place of privilege to be able to like make these discerning choices, and sometimes fast fashion is what's affordable for folks or like what size accessible. But like personally, I went into like a Zara the other weekend and I was
Hmm.
like, everything feels like crap. Like everything feels like it will like deteriorate. Like I would wear it and it would like turn to dust. Um, which is, but like it's also like, are these our options truly? And this is a whole other can of worms. But the fast fashion conversation that I sometimes like dip my toes into because it's so nuanced and layered. Um, but no, it's totally made me rethink about kind of the quality. I definitely consume less fast fashion. I mean, there's still like I need jeans, I need whatever. So I'm not totally sworn off on fast fashion. Like there's still purchases that I make, but definitely less, which is
Hmm.
nice.
Yeah, yeah. I do really like that there's been this, it's been normalized now, I feel like, to a point to buy secondhand and like definitely encouraged, which I think is good. But yeah, definitely fast fashion and stuff is, it's a nuanced conversation. And I feel like at a certain point, I mean, maybe this is going like too deep into the conversation, but I feel like the original purpose was to have a way to provide wearable, like good quality garments at an affordable price. And I feel like over time, the affordable price kind of took over the quality. And I feel like there needs to be some sort of balance so that it could be more accessible for people. But then at the same time, like we need to understand that we live in a society. And now,
We
Costs are being
totally
driven
live in a
up.
society.
yeah.
No, yeah, I think that's a good point though, because like people deserve to have like decent quality clothing at an affordable price, and people also deserve to be compensated fairly for their labor, right? So there's, I don't know, there's just these like huge companies that are just like literally like I feel like they just burn the clothes that they go through, right? They're just like,
Mm.
I don't know. Again, we live in a society.
It always comes down to capitalism in all of my conversations. I'm just kidding, but like,
But like kind of.
it's like it's hard to talk about this stuff without kind of talking about it a little bit because it does impact how we consume.
Oh yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, so yeah, we talked about your evolution, I guess, of fashion with knitting, and I guess I'm curious in hearing about what creating your own wearables kind of means to you. Do you feel like it's changed you in a way that's like perceivable, or is it just like an outlet of creative energy or etc.?
I love this question. I think to me, it means like it having that sense of agency that I can decide how big or small I want it to be. I can decide what color or fabric I want it in. And then I get to make it with my own two hands. Like that is such a beautiful and amazing thing in and of itself. I know we get so caught up in like the newest designs and all the yarns, but I think it's honestly, it's not magic, but because these are skills that we learn. But that like means everything to me in a way. Um, and if it's changed me, I think what we were just talking about, yeah, I think it changes like it has changed how I see clothes and I view them. Um, but I'm not sure if there's any like other real changes. But now I'm just kind of meandering through this answer.
No, but I love that. Yeah, I feel like it's really important and notable to know that, yeah, the agency thing is like so true, because I feel like a lot of times if we're just purchasing from stock made, that's we're choosing to purchase, right? But and to make a selection, but it's we don't have any input necessarily in terms of how it was already like created. And I feel like sometimes I feel like I spend more energy just flipping through the shopping sites trying to look for what I want that fits the bill exactly, rather than like sometimes it's easier to just make it, or like not easier, but like the mental load of work that I have to do sometimes is a little bit easier than like searching through like 4 different websites.
Right. And that's like something we didn't even touch on in our like fashion conversation. How just like effed sizing is and how exhausting it is to have to find something in stores that fits you. And that's coming from, I mean, weren't you like straight size people, right? So if it's exhausting for us, like it only gets more compounded, right? The bigger your size is, really.
Yeah, yeah. And it's like, even if you, I mean, okay, well, even going beyond just the knowing your size as like a letter or a number or whatever, I feel like even if you do know your measurements, there's no guarantee that what you buy to those measurements will fit you in a way that you like.
No, yeah. Like I feel like, what the jean sizes are, what, like, 26, 27, whatever. I could be like different sizes, even though that's like technically supposed to be my waist, right? I hate it. I hate it so much.
Oh my God. Yeah. I think pants especially are so difficult, which was why I was so adverse to pants for a really long time. I used to, this is a lore thing, but I used to wear exclusively skirts and like elasticated waist, like shorts and stuff, because I just like couldn't find pants that I liked. And it took like me understanding how to sew to just buy stuff that would fit one measurement. So usually like I buy to like my butt and then I just take in the waist. And it's like, we have to do all this extra work for it to fit us. So it's like, for things like sweaters or like tops that we're knitting, it's like if we're starting from scratch, there's a higher likelihood that you're able to create something that you really, really like versus, taking it off the shelves, which I think is good.
Yeah, it's like taking that back, I think, from the shopping experience. You're like taking that power back from corporations who like dictate, trends and how it should fit and what your size is. I think that's really powerful.
Yeah, for sure. Power to the consumers, or the creators in this case, I guess. And we're almost at the end. What do you see in the future for you? Like, what do you, you could also say, I have not thought that far. That's also a valid answer because I also live like that. But like, what do you see in the future for you in terms of knitting and creating your own garments and how that applies to your personal style?
Sure. I think at some point I am gonna reach a critical mass of sweaters, right? Where I'm not gonna need any more sweaters. I'm not there yet, but I fear that day when it comes. So I think um it might take my knitting more into like homeware or like blankets, and maybe I don't think I'll ever be a sock knitter. But I think in my head, like I'll just like move on to like whatever the next need is. And then maybe that's when I maybe get into sewing or something like that, when I want to create different garments other than like sweaters and tops. I still am like focused on building out pieces in my wardrobe that I love, that I will get wear out of. But yeah, I think that's like the fun of it, right? That we have all these skills now that we can continue to use, and then we can build upon them, which is, again, that's so cool.
Yeah. No, that's such a great point about the sweater critical mass. Like, I only have so much storage space that I can have.
For sweaters.
Yeah. Yeah, you and I both, we live in cities, so we work in smaller spaces. I mean, New York's even, you're more condensed than it here in DC, but it's like there's only so much of my closet that I could have, like a giant pile of sweaters, right? Like I don't, that makes me sad to say. Some other things might just have to go.
Yeah. That's a good point because even though we're creating these sweaters for, with the intention to wear long term and to have potentially to have in our lives for a long time, we put in that work and stuff, but it is still clothes at the end. And I do feel like that your style and taste change, so you cycle out of certain creations. Like we just talked about how we don't wear like the first 3 sweaters we made basically.
Yeah, so the chunky knits.
Yeah, so I think it's a natural part of fashion and making wearables, but that's also a great point. That I think that's also the beauty of knitting, that you could take it to places that are not just limited to putting clothes on your body, and that's kind of what makes it craft, I guess, versus just creation.
Right, like it's an art, but it's also a skill. I guess art is a skill, but like it's so practical.
I love that for us.
Me too.
All right, I think that's like all the questions that I had. Thank you for agreeing to do this and kicking off like the inaugural series.
Thank you for creating this space. I really enjoyed this. I really want to do more like actual, what's the word? Like meeting with people that I see online.
Yeah.
That's the word. Like I want to do more things like this. So thank you for inviting me. I feel really honored. And yeah. That's it.
If I'm in DC, I'll hit you up. If you're in New York, hit me up. We can go yarn shopping together, and it'll be fun. Knit and chat in real life.
Yeah.
I know. Oh my God, it'll be so chaotic. Can the world contain? Can the world contain Amanda and Jenny? It's not ready.
It's not ready.